This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. New Discoveries at Jamestown by John L. Cotter and J. Paul Hudson. Part 2. Daily Life at Jamestown 300 years ago as revealed by recovered objects. By J. Paul Hudson, Museum Curator, Colonial National Historical Park. Here is a quote. Hitherto they, historians, have depended too much upon manuscript evidences. Perhaps the day is not distant when the social historian, whether he is writing about the New England Puritans, or the Pennsylvania Germans, or the rice planters of southern Carolina, will look underground as well as in the archives for his evidence. End of quote. By Dr. T.J. Wertenbaker. Archaeological explorations at Jamestown, Virginia, site of the first successful English colony in the New World, have brought to light thousands of colonial period artifacts which were used by the Virginia settlers from 1607 until 1699. A study of these ancient objects, which were buried under the soil at Jamestown for many decades, reveal in many ways how the English colonists lived on a small wilderness island over 300 years ago. Artifacts unearthed include pottery and glassware, clay pipes, building materials and hand-wrought hardware, tools and farm implements, weapons, kitchen utensils and fireplace accessories, furniture hardware, lighting devices, eating and drinking vessels, tableware, costume accessories and footwear, medical equipment, horse gear, coins and weights, and many items relating to household and town industries, transportation, trade, and fishing. These artifacts provide invaluable information concerning the everyday life and manners of the first Virginia settlers. A brief description of many of them is given on the following pages. Excavated artifacts reveal that the Jamestown colonists built their houses in the same style as those they knew in England, insofar as local materials permitted. There were differences, however, for they were in a land replete with vast forests and untapped natural resources close at hand which they used to advantage. The Virginia known to the first settlers was a carpenter's paradise, and consequently the early buildings were the work of artisans in wood. The first rude shelters, the split wood fencing, the clapboard roof, puncheon floors, cupboards, benches, stools, and wood plows are all examples of skilled working with wood. Houses. Timber at Jamestown was plentiful, so many houses, especially in the early years, were of frame construction. During the first decade or so, house construction reflected a primitive use found ready at hand, such as saplings for a sort of framing, and use of branches, leafage, bark, and animal skins. During these early years, when the settlers were having such a difficult time staying alive, mud walls, wattle and daub, and coarse marsh grass thatch were used. Out of these years of improvising, construction with squared posts, and later with quarterings, studs, came into practice. There was probably little thought of plastering walls during the first 2 decades, and when plastering was adopted, clay, or clay mixed with oyster shell lime, was first used. The early floors were of clay, and such floors continued to be used in the humbler dwellings throughout the 1600s. It can be assumed that most of the dwellings, or shelters, of the Jamestown settlers, certainly until about 1630, had a rough and primitive appearance. After Jamestown had attained some degree of permanency, many houses were built of brick. It is quite clear from documentary records and archaeological remains that the colonists not only made their own brick, but that the process, as well as the finished products, followed closely the English method. 4 brick kilns were discovered on Jamestown Island during archaeological explorations. Illustration caption. An early Jamestown house. Conjectural sketch by Sidney E. King. End of caption. Another illustration caption. A brick house at Jamestown about 1640. Conjectural sketch by Sidney E. King. End of caption. Another illustration caption. The majority of the locks and keys used in the early houses were imported from England. End of caption. Another illustration caption. A few 17th century hand-wrought hinges in the Jamestown collection. End of caption. Building hardware. While some of the hand-wrought hardware found at Jamestown was made in the colony, most of it was imported from England. Types of building hardware unearthed include an excellent assortment of nails, spikes, staples, locks, keys, hinges, pintles, shutter fasteners, bolts, hasps, latches, door knockers, door pulls, foot scrapers, gutter supports, wall anchors, and ornamental hardware. In many instances, each type is represented by several varieties. Citing two examples, there are more than 20 kinds of nails and at least 15 different kinds of hinges in the collection. Illustration caption. Some nails, spikes, staples, and other iron hardware used at Jamestown over 300 years ago. End of caption. Another illustration caption. Some Jamestown houses had leaded glass wrought iron window casements similar to the ones shown here, courtesy the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. End of caption. It is believed that wooden hardware was used on many of the early houses. Windows. A few glass window panes may have been made in the Jamestown glass factory, which was built in 1608. Most of the window glass used in the colony, however, was shipped from England. Many of the early panes used were diamond-shaped, known as whorls, and were held in place by means of slotted lead strips, known as cames. The window frames used in a few of the Jamestown houses were hand-wrought iron casements. Most of the humbler dwellings had no glass panes in the windows. The window openings were closed by batten shutters, operated by hinges of wood and fitted with wooden fastening devices. Wall and fireplace tile. Most of the hand-painted tiles used at Jamestown for decorating walls and fireplaces were imported from Holland. A few were made in England. Made of a light buff clay and known as Delftware, the tiles unearthed are decorated in blue, with a conventionalized design in each corner and a central picture or motif. Covered with a tin glaze, the majority of tiles found measure about 5 inches square by 3/8 inch thick. The edges are beveled, permitting them to be set very close together at the glazed surface. The attractively decorated tiles added a touch of beauty to a few Jamestown interiors. Roofing materials. 4 kinds of roofing materials have been excavated: plain, flat earthenware tiles, curved earthenware pan tiles, slate, and wooden shingles. The plain tiles were made in Jamestown brick kilns, and it is possible that some of the S-curved red pen tiles were also made locally. Slate was brought over from England, whereas most of the shingles were derived from native cedar and oak logs. Other materials used in roofing included bark, marsh grass and reeds, thatch, and boards. Sod appears to have been used on some of the very early houses. Lime. Lime for mortar, plaster, and ornamental plaster was made in crude lime kilns at Jamestown from calcined oyster shells. The oyster shells came from the James River. Illustration caption. A wrought iron window casement unearthed near an early 17th century building site. End of caption. Another illustration caption. Wall or fireplace tiles found at Jamestown which were made in Holland. The blue designs and pictures were painted on a white background. End of caption. Illustration caption. Kinds of roofing materials excavated include flat tiles, shown here, curved pan tiles, slate, and shingles. End of caption. Illustration caption. Ornamental plaster was used in a few buildings for enhancing the beauty of both the interior and exterior. End of caption. Illustration caption. The interior of a small Jamestown house about 1650. Although the painting is conjectural, many items shown, pottery, glassware, fireplace tools, and kitchen accessories, were unearthed on this historic island. Painting by Sidney E. King. End of caption. Plaster and mortar. Plaster and mortar have been found at Jamestown in abundance. It appears that the majority of brick houses and many frame structures had plastered walls and ceilings after 1635. Some plaster found had been whitewashed, while other plaster bore its natural whitish-gray color. Mortar was found wherever brick foundations were located. The plaster and mortar used at Jamestown was made from oyster shell lime, sand, and clay. Ornamental plasterwork. Ornamental plaster was found in a few of the excavations. The plasterwork was done in raised ornamental designs used for enhancing the beauty of both the interior and exterior of a building. Designs that have been found include Roman numerals, letters, mottos, crests, veined leaves, rosettes, flowers, geometric designs, a lion, and a face or mask. Many fragments of molded plaster cornices have also been excavated. Broken oyster shells are distinguishable in the decorated plasterwork, indicating that the pargetting was done at Jamestown. House furnishings. Busy conquering a stubborn wilderness, the first Jamestown settlers had only a few things to make their houses cozy and cheerful. In most cases, their worldly goods consisted of a few cooking utensils, a change of clothing, a weapon or two, and a few pieces of homemade furniture. However, between 1607 and 1612, George Percy was generously outfitted with some necessities as well as much fine apparel and numerous luxury items, including a feather bed, by his brother the 9th Earl of Northumberland, as published records of the Earl's expenditures for George show. Other persons of gentle birth and position quite probably enjoyed similar goods. After the early years of hardship had passed, the colonists began to acquire possessions for a more pleasant living, and by 1650 the better houses were equipped with most of the necessities of life of those times, as well as a few luxuries of comfortable living. Furniture. Very little furniture was brought over from England during the early years of the colony. Perhaps a few chests and Bible boxes were imported, but most of the large pieces of furniture, such as tables, chairs, bedsteads, chests of drawers, cupboards, benches, and cradles, would have been made in Virginia. Woods commonly used included pine, cedar, walnut, maple, and oak. Illustration caption. Furniture, hardware, and accessories found. Much of the furniture used in the Jamestown houses was made in Virginia. End of caption. Furniture, hardware, and accessories excavated at Jamestown include hinges, locks, drawer pulls, chest handles, escutcheon plates, upholstering tacks, hasps, and finials. Most of the furniture hardware is of brass, probably used after 1650. Since much of it is skillfully decorated, it is believed that it once was attached to furniture of high quality. Furniture used during the first 2 decades of the settlement, however, must have been simple, with little or no ornamentation. Lighting devices. The candle, made of either tallow or bayberry wax, was the standard lighting device at Jamestown. Pine torches were often used out of doors, and rushlights and candlewood were undoubtedly used in the humbler dwellings during the very early years of the settlement. Candlesticks unearthed at Jamestown include a large brass pricket holder, one made of English sgraffito ware, several incomplete earthenware holders, and parts of Delftware candlesticks. Many fragments of brass and iron candlesticks, as well as a few candle snuffers, have also been recovered. Illustration caption. Both brass and pottery candlesticks have been found. The candle was the standard lighting device during the 17th century. End of caption. Fireplace accessories. The fireplace, around which the family gathered, was one of the most important features in the Jamestown home. Its fire offered warmth in winter, afforded light at night, and cooked the family meals during the day. An oven, usually found at the back or at one side of the fireplace, baked the family bread and other foods. About the fireplace many home chores were carried out, including spinning and sewing, and not far from the glow of the burning logs the children learned their daily lessons and received their early religious training. Social activities were enjoyed about the hearth, especially during the long winter evenings, and when a member of the family was ill, the fireplace and its accessories were in constant use. The fireplace was the first place visited by the housewife in the early morning, and was usually the last place where she performed her household duties late at night. A fine assortment of fireplace tools and accessories have been found at Jamestown, including iron tongs, shovels, andirons, parts of brass warming pans, and a large fragment from a cast iron fireback. One early 17th century andiron recovered is attractively decorated with a cherub's head in relief. Illustration caption: a few fireplace tools unearthed at Jamestown. End of caption. Another illustration caption: an early 17th century andiron in the Jamestown collection. Note the cherub's head near the base. End of caption. Cooking utensils and accessories. A large and varied assortment of cooking utensils and kitchen accessories have been excavated, including kettles, pots, pans, skillets, frying pans, toasters, broilers, griddles, skimmers, skewers, spits, ladles, pothooks, trammels, cranes, trivets, cleavers, knives and forks, sieves, and colanders. While only a few are complete, others are almost complete, or at least easily recognizable. During the early years of the colony, people in England who planned to emigrate to Jamestown were advised to bring the following: household implements, 1 iron pot, 1 kettle, 1 large frying pan, 1 gridiron, 2 skillets, 1 spit, platters, dishes, spoons of wood. With the exception of the wooden items, all of the utensils listed have been excavated. Illustration caption: a wrought iron trammel used for hanging a pot from a fireplace crane. The adjustable hook made it possible to raise or lower the pot. End of caption. Illustration caption: an iron pot and pot fragment unearthed at Jamestown. Types used during the 17th century. End of caption. Illustration caption: many earthenware vessels found were used for cooking purposes, including baking dishes, 3-legged pots, and covered pots. End of caption. Illustration caption: a few kitchen utensils and accessories excavated at Jamestown: a ladle, brass pan, knife blades, fork, kettle fragments, spout, colander fragments, and pothooks. End of caption. Illustration caption: a family enjoying a meal about 1650. Many of the eating and drinking vessels portrayed, together with much of the tableware, are types which have been excavated. Conjectural sketch by Sidney E. King. End of caption. Table accessories. In the small houses at Jamestown, the kitchen also served as the dining room. During the early years, many settlers probably ate with wooden spoons out of wooden bowls and trenchers, and drank from mugs made of horn, wood, or leather. As the colony became well established, these crude utensils and vessels were used less frequently and were gradually replaced with ones made of pottery, metalware, and glassware. None of the perishable woodenware, horn, or leather items have been found at Jamestown, but a large assortment of more durable objects used at the table have been recovered. Space permits only brief descriptions of the more common types unearthed. Knives, forks, and spoons. The table knives found at Jamestown vary in length from 6 3/8 inches to 8 1/4 inches. Most of them have either bone or ivory handles, although 3 have embossed brass handles, and one, found in a late 17th century well, has an exquisite handle of banded agate. The forks in the collection also have bone or ivory handles, the majority displaying 2 steel prongs or tines. The number of prongs, however, is no positive identification of any particular period, as many English forks of the mid-17th century had 3 prongs, and a few had 4 prongs. Types of spoons excavated include seal heads, slipped ends, puritans, and triffids. The majority were made of either pewter or latten metal, a brass-like alloy, although 3 in the collection were made of silver. The earliest spoons found have rounded bowls and 6-sided stems handles, whereas those made after 1650 usually have oval bowls and flat 4-sided handles. One of the silver spoons, with rounded bowl and slipped end, bears the initials of its owner, WC/E, on the slipped end of the handle. This spoon appears to have been made between 1600 and 1625, and is still in excellent condition. The most important spoon in the Jamestown collection, and one of the most significant objects excavated, is an incomplete pewter spoon, a variant of the triffid or split-end type common during the 1650 to 1690 period. Impressed on the handle, in the trefoil finial of the stem, is the mark of the maker, giving his name, the Virginia town where he worked, and the year he started business. This is the sole surviving touch or mark of an American pewterer of the 17th century. The complete legend encircling a heart reads, Joseph Copeland / 1675 / Chuckatuck. Chuckatuck is a small Virginia village in Nansemond County, about 30 miles southeast of Jamestown. Joseph Copeland later moved to Jamestown, where he was caretaker of the State House from 1688 to 1691. He may have made pewter in Virginia's first capital. His matchless spoon, found in the old Jamestown soil, is the oldest dated piece of American-made pewter in existence. Pottery and porcelain. The largest and most representative collection of 17th century European and early American pottery which has been excavated in America is on exhibition at Jamestown. Thousands of fragments of colorful types have been found, and by the exercise of extreme care and patience, museum technicians have pieced together many early specimens. These examples reveal the kinds of pottery used in the wilderness settlement over 3 centuries ago. Included in this ceramic collection are pitchers, bowls, jugs, cups, mugs, porringers, milk pans, jars, plates and dishes, pots, and platters. These were used at the table, as well as for the storage of foods and for other purposes. While some of the utilitarian earthenware was made at Jamestown, most of the pottery that has been found was imported from England. Many types also came from other European countries, including Germany, Holland, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. One kind of maiolica may have been made in Mexico, while the few fragments of porcelain recovered were made in China. Because of the great variety and importance of the ceramic collection, a few of the more representative types will be described briefly. Illustration caption. A few knives, forks, and spoons unearthed at Jamestown. End of caption. Illustration caption. The pewter spoon handle at the top, unearthed at Jamestown, is the oldest dated piece of American pewter in existence. It was made by Joseph Copeland of Chuckatuck, Virginia, in 1675. The spoon on the bottom is a conjectural restoration of Copeland's specimen. End of caption. Illustration caption. A few examples of lead-glazed earthenware made in England during the 17th century. All were unearthed at Jamestown. End of caption. Illustration caption. Examples of lead-glazed earthenware made at Jamestown about 1640 to 1650. Illustration caption. English sgraffito, or scratched ware, one of the most colorful types of pottery unearthed at Jamestown. End of caption. Illustration caption. English slip-decorated ware. Although made in England mainly for local consumption, many attractive examples were shipped to Virginia during the 17th century. End of caption. Lead-glazed earthenware. Most of these vessels were made for utilitarian purposes, and were usually glazed only on the inside. While some were made at Jamestown, the majority were imported from England. One type, a grit-tempered earthenware, was manufactured in North Devonshire. Another kind, a hard-fired earthenware, was also made in England. At least 2 distinct types of local-made earthenware have been found, and as many examples have well-proportioned shapes and attractive designs, it is evident that they were not fashioned by a young apprentice, but by a trained potter who took pride in shaping his wares. English sgraffito-ware, a slipware. This colorful pottery, beautifully decorated with incised designs, is an English earthenware of red or buff clay on which a slip was applied. Before firing, a decoration was scratched, stippled, or cut through the slip, exposing the darker color of the body. The entire piece then received a transparent lead glaze, either clear or covered with an oxide. The English sgraffito-ware found at Jamestown was made near Barnstaple, in North Devonshire, probably after 1640. The reddish-brown floral and geometric designs which decorate the vessels are unusually attractive against colorful yellow backgrounds. Sgraffito is an Italian word meaning scratched. English slip-decorated ware. This colorful English pottery, which was made for everyday use, is a lead-glazed earthenware decorated with a liquid clay or slip. The design was usually dropped or trailed upon the ware from the spout, or quill, of a slip cup, somewhat in the manner a baker decorates a cake with icing. Or it may have been painted over a large area, or placed on in molded pads. Although most of the slip-decorated ware found at Jamestown was made in England, there is some evidence that a few vessels may have been manufactured in America during the late 17th century. English redware with marbled slip decoration. On this type English earthenware, which usually has a red body, the liquid slip was marbled or combed over the surface of the vessel with a toothed instrument of wire or leather to produce the effect of paper marbling. Some in the Jamestown collection appear to have been made as early as 1625. Italian Maiolica. Maiolica is a word derived from a type of pottery made on the Spanish island of Majorca. The 17th century Italian Maiolica ware found at Jamestown is a red body earthenware with scratched or incised designs, a true sgraffito ware. Somewhat similar in appearance to the English sgraffito ware, the desired design was scratched through the cream-colored slip, revealing the reddish-brown body beneath. On many examples, colorful lines were hand-painted over or near the incised designs, usually in reds, yellows, and greens, and were covered with a transparent lead glaze. Illustration caption: English redware with marbled slip decoration, 1625 to 1650 period or earlier, unearthed at Jamestown. End of caption. Illustration caption: Late 17th century Italian Maiolica bowls excavated at Jamestown. End of caption. Illustration caption: A few examples of English Delftware in the Jamestown collection. End of caption. Delftware. This is a soft pottery covered with an opaque white tin glaze and decorated with hand-painted designs, usually in blues and purples. A few specimens excavated are embellished with pleasing patterns in polychrome colors. Most of the Delftware unearthed at Jamestown was made in England, Lambeth, Southwark, and Bristol, although a few examples were imported from Holland. Spanish Maiolica. This Maiolica is a tin-glazed earthenware with a soft body, usually buff in color and porous in texture. The colorful decorations were hand-painted on the absorbent surface, usually in greens, blues, yellows, and reddish-browns, against a white background. Some small Spanish jugs in the collection bear very crude, dark red floral designs painted against a cream-colored background. A few examples of Maiolica found at Jamestown are believed to have been made in Lisbon, and these usually have designs in blues and dark purples against a white background. Salt-glazed stoneware. This common but attractive type of pottery found in many excavations at Jamestown includes mugs, jars, bottles, tankards, and jugs. It is very hard ware, which was fired at high temperatures and finished with a salt glaze, formed by throwing common salt into the furnace. The surface of the body has a pitted appearance resembling an orange peel, and is covered with a thin glass-like coating. Most of the salt-glazed stoneware unearthed was made in Germany, although a small amount was manufactured in England. Illustration caption: colorful Spanish maiolica found which appear to have been made before 1650. End of caption. Illustration caption: a large German stoneware jug unearthed at Jamestown. The date 1661 appears above the medallion. End of caption. Illustration caption: a few examples of German salt-glazed stoneware in the Jamestown collection. All were made during the 17th century. End of caption. Illustration caption: reconstructed wine glasses and wine glass fragments in the Jamestown collection. End of caption. Illustration caption: note the maker's marks or seals on the wine glass fragments. Only a few English wine glasses bearing 17th century maker's seals have been found in America. End of caption. Metalware eating and drinking vessels. While large numbers of eating and drinking vessels made of pottery have been excavated on Jamestown Island, only a few fragments of utensils made of silver, pewter, brass, and copper were found. Metalware vessels were relatively scarce during the early years of the settlement, and their almost complete absence in the Jamestown collection may be attributed to the fact that not many of them were discarded, regardless of their worn condition. Only a few metal handles from mugs and cups, and a small number of pewter plate fragments have been excavated. Although no complete specimens of domestic silver and pewter eating and drinking vessels were found, 17th century records and inventories indicate that many Jamestown families owned such wares, especially after 1630, including cups, beakers, dishes, salts, salvers, tankards, porringers, bowls, and plates. It is of interest that 2 goldsmiths, 2 refiners, and a jeweler arrived at Jamestown in 1608 aboard the supply ship Phoenix. Although John Smith related that these artisans never had occasion to exercise their craft, it is possible that they made a few metal objects, such as spoons, in the capital city. Glass drinking vessels. Glass was made at Jamestown in 1608 to 1609, and again in 1621 to 24. It was, in all probability, the first commodity made by the English in a factory in the New World. Many glass fragments were found at the furnace site, but none was large enough to reveal what specific glass objects were made there. It appears that drinking glasses may have been among the items manufactured. The majority of the glass drinking vessels unearthed at Jamestown were made in England, although a few were manufactured in Germany, Italy, and the Low Countries. In the collection are fragments from goblets, beakers, bowls, and wine glasses. 4 of the English wine glass stems bear maker's seals, rare marks seldom found on English drinking vessels. Glass wine and gin bottles. These comprise a large and important part of the Jamestown collection. Literally thousands of glass fragments from these bottles have been unearthed, and by diligent and patient work a few complete wine and gin bottles have been pieced together. The glass wine bottles were made in England. The oldest excavated, made between 1640 and 1660, has spherical bodies and tall necks. Those made between 1660 and 1680 have cup-shaped bodies with short necks. Of the period between 1680 and 1700, the neck is very short and the body is wide and squat. Insofar as is known, no glass wine bottles were used in Jamestown before 1640. Illustration caption: glass wine bottles unearthed at Jamestown ranging in date from 1640 to 1690. Thousands of fragments of these bottles have been recovered. End of caption. Illustration caption: an assortment of glass bottle seals in the Jamestown collection. Some of the wealthy planters had their initials, or other ornamental device, stamped on the shoulders of the wine bottles which they ordered from England. End of caption. Illustration caption: this Dutch gin bottle excavated at Jamestown was imported from Holland. End of caption. About 1650, the practice of affixing glass seals or buttons on the shoulders of English wine bottles was begun. The seal was inscribed with a name or initials, or a date, sometimes a coat of arms or a crest or other device or ornament. Many of these glass bottle seals have been found at Jamestown. As a rule, only the wealthy and influential planters had seals stamped on their wine bottles. Gin bottles found at Jamestown are tall and square with thin glass sides. Imported from Holland, many were made as early as 1625. One gin bottle was miraculously unearthed intact, and not as much as a chip or crack was found on this 300-year-old fragile specimen. Food storage vessels and facilities. Many earthenware jars, pots, bowls, and jugs excavated at Jamestown were used for the storage of foods. Wooden and wicker containers were also used, although because of their perishable nature none was unearthed. 17th century inventories list many of these perishable storage items, including casks, barrels, hogsheads, tubs, bins, and baskets. Leather bottles were also mentioned in a few early records. Illustration caption: earthenware vessels used for the storage of foods. Some were made at Jamestown, some were imported from England. End of caption. Illustration caption: harvesting ice about 1650. Archaeological excavations revealed that ice houses were built on the historic island over 300 years ago. Painting by Sidney E. King. End of caption. A brick-lined storage compartment was found in the cellar, below floor level, of one of the 17th century buildings. It was used undoubtedly for the storage of such easily spoiled foods as milk, cheese, eggs, and cream. Wine, too, was probably kept in bottles in the cool compartment, as many broken bottles were found inside. An extremely important discovery was a large, deep ice storage pit, believed to be the only 17th century ice pit which has been excavated in Virginia. The conjectural painting on page 48 shows its probable appearance when in use about 1650. Ice storage pits held dairy products, meats, and other spoilable foods as well as ice. Pond ice was usually cut and stored in the pit in late winter. Sometimes it lasted until late summer or early autumn. Clothing and footwear. The Jamestown settlers of the middle class were usually dressed in hard-wearing, rough clothes made of homespun material, with a slightly better, and perhaps more colorful, costume for Sunday and holiday wear. In 1622, each Englishman who planned to emigrate to Jamestown was advised to supply himself with the following wearing apparel: 1 Monmouth cap, a flat round cap. 3 falling bands, a neckband or collar of a shirt which turned down over the shoulders. 3 shirts. 1 waistcoat. 1 suit of canvas, a suit made of coarse cloth such as cotton, hemp, tow, or jute. 1 suit of frieze, a woolen fabric with a nap. 1 suit of cloth. 3 pair of Irish stockings. 4 pair of shoes. 1 pair of garters. 1 dozen of points. A point was a tie or string ending with an anglet, and used to join parts of a costume as doublet and hose. The women wore plain frocks and petticoats, although a few of the wealthy ladies owned silk, satin, and velvet dresses. Bodices, as a rule, were long-pointed, and skirts were full and long. Perhaps the most unique items of wearing apparel recovered at Jamestown were several leather shoe soles and 2 almost complete shoes, found in a dirt-lined well in association with artifacts of the 1625 to 1650 period. Illustration caption: for everyday use, the Jamestown settlers wore hard-wearing clothes made of homespun cloth. Conjectural sketch by Sidney E. King. End of caption. Other objects unearthed relating to wearing apparel and costume accessories include an excellent assortment of buckles, buttons, and brass eyelets. Items in the collection which were used in the mending of clothes include needles, pins, and thimbles, both brass and silver. Illustration caption: a leather shoe and several leather shoe soles were uncovered in an early 17th century well. End of caption. Illustration caption: A few buckles and buttons in the Jamestown collection. Many are over 300 years old. End of caption. Illustration caption. Homespun clothes were seldom discarded. The many pins, needles, and thimbles found reveal that mending was a never-ending chore for the busy housewife. End of caption. Illustration caption. An assortment of carpenter's tools unearthed at Jamestown. Most of them were used over 3 centuries ago. End of caption. Illustration caption. The Jamestown cooper was a busy craftsman. Many barrels, hogsheads, and casks were needed in the colony, and large quantities of barrel staves were made for shipping to England. Painting by Sidney E. King. End of caption. End of this section.